Good morning. You're all very welcome to this second episode of a series of webinars with Digital Garage and Leo Fingal. Delighted to welcome you. The numbers are fantastic, and we are into our second phase, as I say, of the series. We started last week with a digital marketing strategy, and this morning's episode, which starts at 10 o'clock, just after my intro, is make your website work for you. So you're all very, very welcome. The trainer and Emma is Emma Gray, and Emma delivered a program last week as well. So I expect you get plenty of good information. So really, we hope you enjoy the series. We have a number of series to continue. We're running for another 3 weeks on the 28th of April, the 5th of May, and the 12th of May. So make sure you get onto the local enterprise office Fingal website, book your place. It's a free session. We're delighted to be collaborating with Google Digital Garage on this series. The feedback has been excellent to date, so we do hope you enjoy it. Numbers are fantastic. I had a look at them there this morning. Predominantly Fingal businesses. There's those outside of Fingal, and you're more than welcome as well. So what I'd say to you is stay in touch with your local enterprise office. Make sure you connect for our easing. We run it once a week. It's good, valuable information. We don't put useless information on it. It's very valid. So make sure you're up to date with that. Keep an eye on the website as well. A lot going on, a lot of training programs, a lot of workshops, a lot of webinars over the summer months as well. So stay in touch, be safe, and enjoy the session. Thank you.
Hi everyone, thanks Martin for the introduction, and welcome everyone, whether you've joined us before or this is your first time joining us here at Google Digital Garage. Today's session is going to be on making your website work for you. So whether you've got an existing website, maybe you're starting one from scratch, or maybe you're thinking about revamping a website you already have, hopefully this will be a useful session to think about some of the elements that go into making a website work. So just a bit about myself. I'm an experienced Digital Garage trainer. We've also got Sarah in the chat, who is another Google Digital Garage trainer, and she'll be looking out for any of your questions too as our moderator today. So a few quick housekeeping things. I won't spend too long on this. We've got a lot to get through, but just a few things that will help out if you're new to YouTube especially. If you're having any trouble viewing the webinar right now, please try refreshing your page. Anytime during the webinar, if anything goes out of sync, that's usually a good way just to get back on track. If you would like to join the instant chat today, we really hope you do. You'll just need a YouTube account. You can very easily set that up. It only takes a couple of seconds, especially if you've already got a Google account. And you'll be able to see that either on the right-hand side, or if you're watching this on mobile, see it below the video where you're seeing me right now. So if you'd like to join the chat, it's a great way to get involved with everybody else who's watching today. Say hello, let us know what business you're joining from, what you're hoping to get out of today, and also whereabouts you are as well, because it'd be great to see if we've got a mixture of people from the general area. We will be pausing throughout the session to answer some of the more complex or maybe the more universal questions from the chat box. So if there's something that Sarah thinks would be great for all of us to have a bit of a chat about, she'll pass some of those over to me. So do feel free, don't feel like you have to wait for the Q&As to pop up on the screen. Do share throughout, and Sarah will be answering those as well as getting some over to me as well. And as Martin mentioned, we are running this as part of a broader series of webinars in partnership with Leo Fingal. So if you'd like to check out our schedule of upcoming training, please see the information in the description below, and I'm sure that Sarah will be sharing that. We'll mention it again at the end as well if you want to have a look once this one's finished and see what topics we've got coming up too. One thing as well I'd like to mention, we have a new Google for Small Business website. So this is a one-stop shop for products, tools, information, resources to help your business move forward. There's a step-by-step online success guide to help you show up on Google, create or improve your website, obviously very relevant to what we're covering today, reach more customers, and generally think about how you're getting in front of people online. So Sarah will share a link in the chat, and again, that's also in the description box too if you want to reference it later, and we'll flag it again at the end as a bit of a reminder too. And if you do have any feedback from today's session, we'll also have a feedback form which is linked in the description box. Once you complete that, you'll also get a link to download a PDF of today's content. And as well as that, as well as getting the copy of the slides, you'll also be able to rewatch today's session here on this YouTube channel, I think you'll get emailed a link to that, but you can also bookmark this page as well while you're here. So that's all the housekeeping, and we'll get on with the actual content of the session. So in today's competitive environments, it's really important to make sure that you have a website, some kind of online presence. It doesn't have to be overcomplicated. It really will depend on what type of business you have, but it's really important that you have this presence online. And one of the reasons, especially if you're an e-commerce type of business, the number of Irish people shopping online continues to grow. So 72% of Irish internet users now shop online. Ireland's the 44th largest market for e-commerce in the world, with a revenue of 2.7 billion euro, and that was 2019. So with more people spending time at home in 2020, I'm sure we will see that increase when we get to the updated report for 2020. Irish citizens also spend 26% more than the European average online. So there's a really booming e-commerce and online marketplace here in Ireland. And there's also really strong brand loyalty. So 83% of consumers always or regularly do their online shopping on the same website. And there's also a sense of wanting to shop from other Irish businesses. So 60% of consumers consider purchasing Irish products as important or very important when they're making those decisions. But of course, not all of you will be having an e-commerce type of shop. So it's also great for lots of other things, like just creating that brand visibility if people are searching or want to find out more about your website and your business. Providing your business with another marketing channel on top of anything you might already have, like social media or email marketing, can also help you to drive people in store and provide information about things like opening hours and locations and directions. And also these days, customers kind of expect you to have one. So they want you to have some kind of hub of information where they know they can go and find up-to-date information about your business and potentially even buy from you directly online too. So we're going to look at some of the things that go into a website. And one of the first ones that most people think of when you think about web design, you think about the visual style, the graphics, the template, the theme, whatever you want to call it, the way that your website looks when you first access it. And that's certainly an important component, but it is just one of the components we'll be talking about today. So within your website, you'll have a number of common elements that appear everywhere on your site. You'll have things like the header, for example, the top section of your website. So this follows people around wherever they go on your site, kind of a consistent element. That usually includes a company logo, either in the top left or sometimes in the middle. Now, I'd love you to pop in the chat as well. If I put you on a random website, say this one we have on the screen, We Pet City, and I ask you to click on that logo, what would you expect to happen? So you're on maybe the About page, the Contact page. If you clicked on that logo, what do you think would happen? I'll just give you a minute to have a think. Imagine you're on a website, you click on the logo, where do you end up? So hopefully some of you are saying that this will usually take you back to the home page. So there's some elements that, even though we don't really think about it that much, we will expect to see across lots of different sites. We expect when we click there that it will take us back to the homepage. There's also usually a footer on most websites. And again, we have some expectations of that. So if I asked you what you would expect in the footer, you might say things like contact information, copyright and privacy policy, maybe FAQs, important links to things like delivery, for example, and returns if you're an e-commerce shop, all the kind of necessary but maybe not so interesting things. The things that we have to have on our site, they're very useful, but people aren't really reading for fun. So we expect those to maybe be in the footer, hidden away, but easy enough to access if people do need them. And then, of course, navigation. Unless you've got a one-page site, you will have some form of navigation, and usually that's across the top of the site below the header, or sometimes on the left. You very rarely see that on the right or in the middle or anywhere else. You do sometimes see an extra navigation along the bottom of the footer, but normally the main one is at the top or the left. So it's useful to think about that consistency as people are going through your site, and also to think about the branding elements as well. So trying to think about your colors, font sizes and styles, and different types of, say, image style, for example, as well. So how can you make that look very memorable and consistent? And especially if you do already have things like a logo, you've already got a sense of what your brand style is, maybe some colors in there. Maybe you're already on things like Facebook and you've chosen a header image for that. So you might have some of those colors and fonts already coming in there. So you want it to feel consistent, and that's going to make your brand a lot more memorable as well. And if you're using content management system, a CMS, so something like Squarespace, Wix, WordPress, Weebly, you're likely to have a theme or template, depending what they call it, and that will be a good way to keep things consistent. So you'll choose things like your fonts when you're setting that up, and you'll be able to then not have to set that for every single individual page. So that's one of your options, a CMS. You might also want to build one from scratch if you're building something a bit more custom or a bit bigger, usually a bit more expensive to do and obviously a bit more time consuming too, but both have their pros and cons. So whichever you're going for, you really want to think about those navigation elements as well as some of the fonts and colors that you're using to make that a good experience and a good first impression as well. So it's not all about design. We do have 6 other characteristics we're going to look at. I'm just going to run through them quickly and then we'll go into each one a bit more in depth. So don't worry about any of them too much right now. So the first one is it's goal orientated. So your website should help you to grow your business. It should have a purpose other than just being an online presence. It should have some kind of goal, even if that goal is to get people to go into your store. It's not really to do anything online. The goal is to tell people information about your in-person store. It should also be organized. So think about your content. Again, this is the navigation. How do people find your content, and is it useful content too? And then functional. So as well as having useful content, is the function of your website useful too? Do you have things like online shops, forms in the right places and where people can easily access and use them? You also want to think about, is it intuitive to use? So is it responsive, for example, on different devices? We'll talk a bit more about that when we get to that section. And finally, is it search friendly? So can search engines, and therefore the people using search engines, actually find your website? So they're the 6 areas. We're going to go into 2 at a time, and then we'll have a break for questions in between. So do keep any questions coming as we hit each section. As I said, don't feel like you have to wait until the Q&A pops up, and Sarah can answer some in the chat as well. So our first one, a great website, is goal orientated. I'd love to know what your goal is for your site too. So if you have a goal, if you have a site already, let us know what your current goal is. If you're thinking about setting one up or maybe expanding your site, what's your reason for doing that? What do you want your website to help you achieve? And I'll just move on, and then I'll come back and see if anyone's had any input there in terms of existing goals. If you don't yet, that's fine, but hopefully this section will prompt you to have a bit of a think, maybe a bit of homework for you there. So 3 main reasons we tend to get when we ask this question, why do you want a website? Actually, probably the other way around. Most people tend to say sales and leads first. Your main goal will be, maybe it's selling online, maybe driving people to your store to make sales. Maybe it's taking bookings for something like a restaurant, generating leads if you're a service-based business, and building a brand as well, so that visibility and awareness and getting in front of people. You might also want to re-engage existing customers. So if you have customers, especially at the moment, if you serve people in person and you haven't been able to do that for a while, you might want a way to just get in touch and stay in touch with those customers. Maybe you want to do something a little bit different, like attract new employees, attract suppliers or stockists, provide information to sort of wholesale customers, for example. And maybe you want to use it for customer support, so providing information, firstly, to save yourself time from having to deal with every single question separately. If you've got a central hub of information about your business, you can point people straight to your website instead of having to sort of type out that answer in an email all the time, as well as providing things like forms so people can get in touch with you directly too. So I can see a couple coming in. So in clients and reaching my shop, Brian says my goal is sales. Yeah, that's a pretty common one. And Rob Mullen, goal is awareness and lead generation. Okay, so a bit of a mixture. Do have a think if you haven't thought about your goal before. It's definitely one to start thinking about. It can really help to define the kind of content that's going to be useful both for you and for the customer as well. And speaking of that customer, we want to also think about who our target audience are. You might have thought about this before, even if you don't have a website. You've probably thought about this just to think about, is your business feasible? Or if you're an existing business, maybe you've got something like social media, email marketing, you've done some kind of advertising before. where you've had to think about your target audience already. But it's good to just rethink sort of who's our audience, who are we trying to get in front of, who are they in terms of demographics, how do they act, how do they think, how do they live, or where do they live. So there's quite a lot of ways you can go about this, and it really does depend on your business. But some things you might want to think about: what location are they at? So are they very local to you? Is it the whole of Ireland? Is it Ireland plus the UK? Is it the whole world? And if it is the whole world, you might actually want to narrow it down a little bit, because unless you're planning on translating your website straight away, you're already narrowing down your audience. So you really want to think realistically right now, who is our audience for our website? Maybe later on you'll translate your website into Spanish, but right now maybe it's English speaking markets. And maybe it's only very locally because you're a service-based business and you can only provide that service locally. So that's quite an easy one to start with. Sort of where do you expect your customers to be in terms of location? You can also think about other demographic data, so things like gender and age, if that's relevant, employment status, maybe whether they're a parent or not. Imagine you sell, children's clothes, you probably want to attract parents or people with children in their family. So there might be, again, some of the other obvious demographics and that just spring to your mind based on your own business. And do let us know in the chat as well if you have any audience sort of pinpoints in mind in terms of who your own audience are. It's always good to see. So you want to think about defining that audience, and then think about putting yourself in their shoes. What kind of information might they be looking for? We'll come on to information organization next, and try to understand their motivations, emotions, desires. What might they be searching for? Are they trying to solve a problem? Are they trying to ask a question? They want an answer to it. Are they looking for a specific type of product? Maybe think about their values as well. Are they looking for the cheapest product or service out there? Are they looking for quality, something unique? Maybe something really specific, like you sell vegan products. So, vegan might be your target market. So those values can be really useful to think about who might be interested in your site and therefore your product and business too. And once we've thought about our goal and our audience, we also want to think about how we're going to measure success. So this really depends on what your goal is. Maybe it's taking things like lead generation, for example, or requests, or answering questions, customer service, in which case it might be through something like a form. So you might be tracking those form submissions. You might also be tracking online sales with something like Google Analytics, or might be built into your e-commerce website. You might want to measure engagement too, so how many people are reading your blog posts, or how many people have read your about page, or just the traffic that's come through to your site as well. So try to be quite specific about what you want your site to accomplish, and that's going to help you figure out what's best to measure, and maybe have a list of a few different things you want to measure. Be realistic, so there's no point setting a massive goal like having 1 million people come to your site in the next week when it's brand new. Be realistic about what's achievable. You might also want to set sort of long-term and short-term goals too, so you've got a few different things to look at over time. And then think about what you need in place to be able to measure that. So maybe it's something as simple as when somebody comes through the door of your cafe, you ask them how they found you. Maybe when somebody calls you up to place an order or make a booking, you ask them on the phone. If you've got Google Ads running, you can actually set up call tracking at no extra cost. And that's a good way to automatically track if your ads, for example, are driving people to call that phone number rather than you having to rely on their memories. And if it's something you're measuring on the website, that's where things like Google Analytics come in. So that's available at no charge for you to set up. And you can see how many people are coming to your site, what kind of pages they're viewing as well. So all of this is really important so you can see exactly who's coming to your site, not in terms of their name, but the demographics and where they're coming from in terms of marketing channels and location, what kind of content they're looking at, and what they're most interested in, and what kind of actions they're taking too. So on to our next one. A great website is organized. So this is all about your information on your website, and it might be that you're starting off with something really, really simple and organization is not top of your mind, and that's completely fine. But as you go on, you might find that your website grows over time. You add more pages, you add more sections, you have more services and products you want to talk about, so the content just gets bigger and bigger. So it can be useful to have a bit of a framework that looks at how all that content's going to fit onto your website. So you can start off by creating a very basic plan. It doesn't have to be anything fancy. I don't know if you've heard the term information architecture before. It sounds probably more technical. It can be very technical, but it doesn't have to be. It can be as simple as what you see on the screen here, and just sort of a hierarchy or plan or framework of what your site's going to look like. There's loads of tools you can use for this. I actually quite like just drawing it out, having post-it notes and moving things around. If you're more of a digital person, there's loads of free tools you can use. You can use something like Google Docs, for example. You can use any kind of drawing type of tool, whatever you have on your device. You don't need anything fancy for this at all. So to take our example, this is a pet sitting website called We Pet City. They have the basics, a homepage. Every site will have at least that one box, a homepage. And then it's likely you've got an about page, services or products, maybe both, and then some kind of contacts. There are three things that tend to pop up on almost every site. You might also then have some other things like probably a privacy policy these days. You might have things like information about deliveries. You might have other kind of informational pages, maybe a blog section. So you can think about it in layers. What's the stuff that would appear on your main navigation? That's that next row down, the about, services, and contact. And then some of those might have sub-pages. So your services here, we can see we've got dog walking, cat sitting, pet daycare. Maybe we've got sort of gerbil feeding as well in there somewhere. So you can think about all those different services, or maybe for you, this is products. Within products, you might have categories and subcategories. So you can start to think about how those fit on your site and branching out. And if you've got lots of products, this could end up being quite a big document too. So just start from the basics and work your way down into those categories and subcategories. And this will then help when you go to organize on your actual website. You don't have to sort of scramble about thinking where things go. You can think about what's called parent and child pages. So in this example, the services is a parent page, and its child pages are the dog walking, cat sitting, daycare, etc. So it's much easier to plan this in advance than it is to try and do it when you're creating your site, or especially if you're working with someone else. It's a very useful thing to be able to hand to them and say, this is what the structure should look like. And if you're working with someone else, like a business partner or a colleague, then it's also useful to make sure you're all on the same page in terms of what pages should be on your site, and then think about what kind of content makes sense there too. So what images and text you actually need on each of those pages, so you can start to get ready for when your site's ready to go live. So some tips for organizing your website. Use short descriptive names. And if you do have something like e-commerce, you might have the option for either labels or categories, or maybe both, maybe slightly different tags as well. It depends what platform you're using and what they call them. So think about using really short descriptive names for those. So you can see the examples here, dog walking, cat sitting, daycare. They're all short and snappy. They're very clear to us as a customer what might be on that page. Keep site visitors in mind. So where would they look for this information? So that comes back to that navigation again. What would they expect to find in the navigation bar? They might not expect to see every single service listed there, but maybe they expect to see the services page, click on that, and then see a list of services they can choose. Or maybe you have drop-down navigation so people can hover over services and then see a list before they click through. Then they might expect to see something else in the footer, so some extra navigation elements. So if I was looking for delivery information on a website, I would probably scroll straight to the bottom. So you can think about your own behavior as well as looking into some of these expected behaviors of a website. So try to keep that most important information in the main navigation, and you might find that changes as your site grows, and some things end up being bumped from the main navigation because you only have so much space there. But when you first start out, that plan can be really helpful. So everything in that middle row there about services and contacts should be on the main navigation bar. So a few quick steps for getting started with organizing. Bear in mind your target audience and what they're looking for. Think about their needs. So when they get to your site, where do you need to direct them to so they can achieve what they're trying to do? So access dog walking services, for example. And how can you then organize your site to help them to keep it organized? You might also think about things like site search. For example, if you have hundreds of products or services, search can be really helpful so they don't have to navigate through all these parent and child sort of hierarchies to get to the page they're looking for. So I can see we've got one question. What's the best platform to create a website that will be using Shopify? So, I mean, you can create your website. I would always say try and create it on Shopify itself. If everything else, if your main shop's going to be on Shopify, it will be much simpler to build all the pages on Shopify as well, rather than trying to have two different platforms working together. So I would normally say bear in mind your own sort of features that you need and do a bit of research and look at your budget as well. But if you're already using Shopify for your e-commerce, it makes sense to then maybe look at the other page features and options they have there too, because you can add extra sort of non-shopping pages to Shopify. I've also seen, though, people use separate platforms like WordPress or Wix and use Shopify as sort of a subdomain there, but it does get a little more complicated to manage, and it basically means you're managing kind of two separate websites, really. So if you can keep it all in one place, it kind of makes sense to do that. I can't see any other questions at the moment, but we've got plenty more time for questions as we go. So I'll move on to the next couple of points out of our 6 elements we're looking at. And then if you do have any questions, either on what we've just covered or on the next 2 coming up, feel free to pop those in the chat as well. So a great website is useful. And this might sound like a very obvious statement. Of course, your website has to be useful, but it's about staying focused on creating relevant content and a good user experience as well. So we've thought about who our customers are. Hopefully you can get in their mindset and think about what kind of content might be useful for them. So what do we mean by content? Really, that's anything that appears on your site. It's quite a broad term, but usually with a website, we're talking about text, images, videos, and then maybe some additional features, but we'll talk about those a little bit later separately. So try to understand your customers. Again, you want to use those short descriptive names for your pages so they know what's going to be on each one, as we've already mentioned. You also want to create content that's then useful for them and their needs. So if I'm running a pet sitting business, what kind of things might they be interested in? Maybe for booking dog walking, for example, they might want to know the credibility and sort of should they trust our dog walkers. You know, they're leaving their pets with you. They might be asking questions around, you know, who are your dog walkers? Maybe they want to see some pictures of the team, for example. Maybe they want to find out information about how to book cat sitting. So you can think about all these different questions they might have and create maybe FAQ type of content or other pages like blog posts that will answer some of those questions. You can then use your information architecture, your nice structure and plan that we've just created, to organize some of that content. So maybe it makes sense to have a blog if you're going to have regularly updated, fresh content, news, for example. Maybe you'll be covering some sort of industry news and trends. Blogs can make sense for that. Or you might have more of an information hub, for example, something that's a bit less changeable and more something that you'd create in advance and keep up to date with any changes too. You also want to think about making content recognizable to search engines, although we will be talking about that a little bit later. So 61% of consumers expect brands to tailor experiences based on their preferences. So this could be, for example, if somebody comes back and they log in again, they might want to see things like favorite items that they bought before, saved items like a wish list, for example, and previous searches or site visits. Thinking about our pet sitting example, maybe if I have used your pet sitting service before, I might want to see the previous pet sitters I've used so I can very easily book them again and not have to start from scratch each time. So people expect and want you to use data that's been shared with you as a brand, as a business, like their purchase history, like their navigation and what they've interacted with, to make that experience a bit more tailored. So if you do have a site that's maybe a little bit bigger and you have things like an account or a registration option, like our pet sitting example does, then you can think about how to use that data. It does get a little bit more complicated to set up, and it really depends on the platform you're using as to what kind of information you'll have from your customers. Like our pet sitting one is quite specific, but for e-commerce in general, that could be things like having wish list features, having things like the ability to see previous orders and maybe even track things like delivery, for example, as well. So think about the kind of things you might expect as a customer. And again, put yourself in the customer's shoes to think about what features would make their lives a little bit easier and hopefully entice them to come back as well. Nearly 9 out of 10 times, so over 90% of the time, people had a helpful or relevant mobile brand experience they said they would purchase from the brand in future. So that experience on different devices, really important, and that can really drive that loyalty and make people more likely to buy from you again. So they might have a great service from you otherwise, but this is obviously one of the big factors for people when they're then choosing to maybe come back to your business. So if you are, most businesses are the type of business where you want people to come back. It's something big like maybe a house purchase. You wouldn't expect instant loyalty and someone to purchase again anytime soon. But without exceptions like that, most businesses, you would hope that they would come back, but also recommend you to friends as well. So that experience across different devices is really important. So you think about content that makes sense on those different devices, maybe someone who's searching on the go as well, might be on mobile or tablet, rather than just the desktop experience. We tend to create websites from the desktop experience, so it's quite easy to then overlook what that looks and feels like on one of those other devices. And ideally, your website will lead people from one page of content to the next until they get to that goal, that big purchase point or lead generation or filling in a form, whatever your big goal of your website is. And you can use analytics to really think about personalization, to think about segmentation as well, if you have different groups. So for example, our pet sitting site has one group who are pet sitters who sign up to do the job, and another group who are the pet owners. So we need to think about two different experiences for those two different groups. They're going to be interested in very different content. The pet sitters will want to know, how do I sign up? How do I create a profile? How do I get paid? How do I accept tasks, for example? Whereas the pet owners will want to know, how do I access the service, and questions around that instead. So they'll be effectively, although they're accessing the same site, they're looking at two very, very different things there. So think about how they might find you. How do they get started on your site? Maybe that's through search and asking a question. Maybe you drive a lot of people to your site through social media or through things like advertising, or maybe through referrals. So people will pass around a business card, for example, instead of a bit more old-fashioned way. Then think about how they engage. So analytics will help you to look at the different pages people are going to, look at those user journeys and really understand how people are traveling through your site. So this might sound like we're leaping ahead a bit for those of you who don't have any website yet, you're getting started, which I'm guessing will be quite a few of you here. But it's just something to bear in mind. Start thinking about some of those potential user journeys as you're planning your site. So if I was a pet sitter, where might I go? Where might I expect to go next? What page might I end up on? Where might I want to go after that? Any kind of follow-up emails or anything like that they might expect after signing up. So you can think about that whole user journey. So our next one, and this is kind of hand in hand, a great website is also functional. So we've thought about the content, but the content, you can have the best content in the world, and if your website isn't actually functional, then no one's going to be able to use your content. Functionality is really about the features that allow people to take action. So that could be something like site search, so people can easily find products, services, information, pages on your site. Really important if you do have a bigger site, and it's an option on most of the main content marketing systems these days. You might have things like online forms, so people can get in touch with you without just emailing. That can make it much more functional on your side, because you can set up different actions based on the type of form people have sent. You can provide people things like drop-down menus. So you're giving a bit of structure to the content that they're providing to you, to the email that they're sending you, instead of just letting them send an email and write whatever they like. You might also have something much bigger like an online shop. That's really a functionality, a feature in itself, even though for some of you that might be almost the whole website as part of your online shop. And within that, you'll have things like checkout features, for example. You'll have carts, again, things like wish lists. You might have the option to get notified if something comes back in stock. There's lots of features that sit within that online store, depending on the platform you're using and what you choose to add to it. And you might have other online tools, like maybe a custom tool could be something that helps you find the best pet sitter for you, for example. It could be something like a map that helps you to locate your local branches of your shop. So something that's a bit more custom to your specific type of business. So we're going to look at 3 different scenarios. The first one maybe sound a little bit familiar. This is the one we've been looking at. So if you were running this We Pet City business, you organise peer-to-peer pet sitting services on a marketplace. So how do you ensure that the right pet owners find the right pet sitters and vice versa? Have a little think. I'm just going to run through all of these, and then we'll come back to talk about how we might address each of these. So scenario number 2, you start a hair salon, you don't have anyone to answer phones and schedule appointments. What kind of feature do you think might help here, and might be a feature that some of you are interested in depending on your business? And then scenario number 3, your bakery makes wedding cakes. People call and ask the same questions about price and delivery all the time. So hopefully you've had a chance to have a little bit of a think. I'm just going to run through some of the things you could do. So in the first one, it's a very custom type of tool, something like find a pet sitter function. So somebody can choose filters. So I'm looking for someone to look after my cat, dog, tortoise. I need them for this date. And then it shows me the people who are available. So very custom type of marketplace tool. In the hair salon example, this is something that's a bit more available in general, and that would be a booking type of tool and system. You don't have to create that from scratch. There's plenty that already exist out there that you can find, that you can tap into. And there's some that are very industry specific. So there's some out there that are just for restaurants, or just for hair salons, or just for gyms and trainers, for example. And then scenario number 3, this could be something like a frequently asked questions page. It could be even a tool where they can put in the size of the cake they need, the delivery date, and find out the price or availability that kind of automatically updates them. And that can save you having to answer the same questions over and over again. Or at least when somebody does ask, you can say, here's the page with all the information, so you don't have to repeat yourself over and over again. So I can see someone said sort of FAQ page, for example. So hopefully have a think for you, what do those challenges look like? Maybe you have some of the same scenarios that we've mentioned, like needing something to take bookings. Maybe it's something like the pet sitting one that's much more specific to your own site, and you might need to find something a bit more custom. I can see Mindful Body said directory, Mains Court Electrical FAQ, Dolores Murray hairdresser schedule one. Yeah, definitely for that, definitely a booking tool. And Mindful Body also said a booking tool. So you can think about those scenarios for yourself. Almost you can write this paragraph for yourself if you need to, and sort of say, you know, I'm doing this and this is my challenge, and then think about the different ways you could address it. So we're on to our next pause for questions. I can see we've got a couple. Rob Mullen, is the structure the same for a B2B versus B2C website? Yes, in terms of the actual content hierarchy, you're still going to have a navigation. You might still have those parent and child type of pages. The main thing I would say there is the actual content on some of those pages might be a bit different. So instead of having e-commerce type of pages, they might still be e-commerce, but the content written on there will be more tailored to wholesale orders instead of individual end customers. Or if you're running services, just the language you use might be different. So I think the structure would be very much similar. It would just be more about the language and the content you use on the pages instead. And then Siobhan, analytics easy to set up on a WordPress site? Yes. WordPress, I'm definitely not a technical person at all. I'm much more of a content and strategy person, but I've set up WordPress analytics many, many times. There's loads of different plugins you can use. The official one, and the one I think is probably the easiest these days, is called Google Site Kit. So if you go into WordPress, in your plugins, search for Google Site Kit, all you'll have to do is actually log in with your Google account. You'll need to go into analytics and set up the account there. But instead of having to copy and paste tags, which some of you might be familiar with, all you'll do is actually log in to your Google account inside that plugin, and you'll be able to connect analytics to your WordPress site. So that's what I'd recommend. But there's plenty of other plugins like Yoast, for example, you could use as well. Monster Insights too. loads of others that you can use. But the official one's called Google Sitekit, and that also helps you to connect to some of the other Google tools as well. So thanks for those questions, Rob and Siobhan. Hopefully, if anyone else has any, we will have a final chance for some more questions at the end, so keep them coming. So on to our final two elements. We've got a great website is intuitive. Again, it might sound obvious. Of course, you want people to naturally be able to find their way around your site, but what do we actually need to think about? And this is really focused on design. And that's not just the visual side of design, but almost user experience design, thinking about how people travel through your sites, the actual design of that structure and designing those journeys too. The idea of your site being intuitive is that your site should naturally lead people through a process. So if I'm a pet sitter or a want-to-be pet sitter and I go onto We Pet City, I'm going to potentially end up signing up for an account, but there's going to be some steps in between. I'm not going to come to your homepage and sign up immediately. I might need to be led through a bit of a process. So maybe there's something on the homepage that says, want to become a pet sitter? Find out how. I can click on that. Then on the next page, there's a bit of information and another nudge to the next step until I get to the end of that goal. So your visitor shouldn't have to think about or struggle to find what they're looking for. And the design can really help with that. So thinking about where do those nudges need to sort of take place to be the most useful for our customers. So a reminder about mobile, especially here, because this is where a lot of user experience falls down. Even these days, you might think most websites are mobile friendly these days, which they are, definitely more so than they were even 5-10 years ago. But there's still a lot of potential flaws with a lot of mobile sites that you might not notice until you start to look for things. And I'm sure you've all had that experience where you've struggled to navigate, whether that's on mobile, tablet or desktop, really. And you've ended up leaving a site because you've been frustrated, or maybe something was getting in your way, or you just couldn't find what you were looking for. So 46% of people say they wouldn't purchase from a brand again if they had an interruptive mobile experience. So it's really a priority to make sure that those people do come back to your brand. And not only would they not purchase again, but maybe they wouldn't even purchase in the first place because they just find it difficult to get to that end point. And purchase here could mean things like signing up as well, of course, depending on your type of business. So it's really a priority to think about how do we make our site intuitive across all devices too. The good news is that more and more websites are being built with technology that is built in from the start. So if you're using one of the massive CMSs like Shopify, for example, like WordPress, like Squarespace, like Wix, any of the others that have been around for a while, they'll all have templates and themes that are responsive. And that's the best practice these days. And they should automatically be responsive anyway. So unless you're creating a site from scratch, it's not really something you'd have to worry too much about in terms of things moving around to make things the right size, things like the navigation menu disappearing into the little burger menu with 3 lines, things like text getting smaller and images moving around. That should all, ideally, be handled by your template. Of course, if you're building from scratch, you need to work with your developer or whoever's building the site for you to make sure that that's the case with them too. But if you've got a good one, then these days, most sites should be made responsive without you having to ask for that as an additional feature. But it's always worth flagging and making sure that that's the case. So using mobile-friendly design is an important first step. That's going to help a lot in terms of making sure that you do have that initial good first impression and people aren't put off by your site if they do access it on mobile. So a few things you can do to make it easy to use your site. Firstly, you can highlight selected elements. So if I'm on your site and I have to, maybe I'm choosing which type of pet I want looked after. Maybe there's a drop-down menu. I can choose cat, dog, rabbit, for example. Highlight the one that I've chosen so you can see where I'm sort of scrolling to. And by scrolling, that might mean tapping, of course, if you're using mobile. You want to have plenty of space for users to tap. So don't have things too close together. If you're anything like me, you can struggle sometimes to tap the right button or hit the right field to type in. You don't want buttons that are so close together that people have to sort of pinch and zoom in to be able to tap the right thing. So you can see on this example, we've got 3 fields and a button, and they're far enough apart that you wouldn't really hit one of them by accident. It'd be very clear which one you're tapping on. They're not too close together. That little bit of blue space in between each of them really helps here. You also want to make sure if you do have any calls to action, ideally have them as something like a button so they can be tapped so people don't have to look for the next step. So if you say sign up now, where do they go to sign up? Hopefully they can just tap sign up now and go straight to the right page. Next tip, and this is especially for people who have e-commerce sites, is to provide opportunities for people to backtrack, continue shopping, come back after a break, and still carry on where they left off. So if I add something to my cart and I then think, oh, actually, I want to go and add something else, I should be able to go back and not lose what's in the cart. And maybe even if I go away and come back again, assuming that I can be recognized, so I haven't cleared my cookies or signed out of my account, hopefully that product would still be waiting in my basket. Now, there's only so long you can do that for, of course, and you can't necessarily guarantee availability if someone leaves something for 4 weeks and comes back. But if I come back, the next day or half an hour later, hopefully that product will be waiting for me. You might also want to recommend things like similar products or services. So if someone is in the process of checkout, for example, when I bought my phone, you probably had this experience as well, buying any kind of device. There's always the option to add things like headphones or a phone case or a screen protector, which are actually quite useful. It feels a little bit salesy sometimes, but it is very useful if someone is interested in making those extra purchases, to put them right in front of them. You'll also see this on the big sites like Amazon, recommended products on that page. So if what I'm looking at isn't quite the right thing, I can choose something else that's maybe in the same category. So a lot of e-commerce platforms will build this in automatically. You might need to add something like a plugin to make this happen, or if you're building your site from scratch, this will need to be built in from the beginning. And then at checkout, and this could be checkout of products, but also any kind of sign up process too, try to reduce the steps. So make it as easy as possible. If you're asking them for their friend's brother's mother's hairdresser's birthday, probably asking too many things there. You can also look at, once you do have this up and running, look at analytics, look at people moving through that process and see where you're actually losing people. So if you find that everyone's leaving on step 3 of 7, maybe something's happening on step 3 that's making it difficult or annoying people and making them sort of leave instead of carrying on. So maybe you can reduce those steps from 7 down to sort of 4 steps instead if you need to. Try and show visitors their progress. So those progress bars or telling them they're on page 2 out of 4 can be really helpful. Otherwise, you might be thinking, I'm on page 4, how many more pages will there be? If I know it's the final page, it's just that extra bit of motivation that you're very close to the end here. You can also think about offering guest checkout, so people don't have to sign up for an account. Some people like to create an account, especially if they're going to come back, but if it's their first purchase or they just don't want to have an account with you, try and offer that option as well. Of course, they'll still need to fill in the basics, things like their payment details, their address if you're delivering a physical product, anything else you need like their name. But you don't need to ask them for a password and a username and anything else that's part of an account sign up. So provide those 2 options, signing up with an account so we'll remember everything for later, or guest checkout for those maybe one-off purchases or people who don't want to sign up for that whole experience. And think about the payment options you're using. This might be a bit dependent on the markets you're in. So you might not just be selling within Ireland, maybe you're selling in Germany as well, and they actually might use slightly different payment systems. But if you can enable some of the basics like PayPal, Google Pay, Apple Pay, some of the ones that are used across multiple countries and quite popular as well, that can make things a lot easier. I know when something uses Google Pay, for example, I actually went to a restaurant the other day for the first time in a long time, and I was able to tip using Google Pay, and it saved me having to put in card details or anything like that. Something like that can make that a really frictionless experience. And the same thing would be with Apple Pay, PayPal, Stripe, maybe any of the others that people are familiar with. It's 2 elements, making it as frictionless as possible because they can log in and use their saved payment details, but also giving them that sense of trust that they know the system that you're using to take payment to. And finally, a great website is search friendly. So you've gone through all this effort to make a great website, to plan it out, think about your goals, to think about the features you're using to make it intuitive and user-friendly. You want people to actually find you when they're searching online. So the process of helping a website increase its visibility on search engines is called search engine optimization, or more often you'll probably hear it called SEO. We do have a training coming up on this, I believe, as part of this series. So do check out the link in the description box, which will show some of the other sessions we've got coming up too, but I believe SEO is one of them in a couple of weeks. Can't remember exactly which date that's on yet, so do have a look at that. But we're going to go through some basic tips now, and then if you're interested, do sign up for that more in-depth webinar as well. So behind the scenes, how Google works, and of course we're going to talk about Google now, but any search engines as well. People might be searching across the world using different search engines. A lot of them do use something quite similar in terms of the process. Software known as web crawlers or spiders find all the web pages on your site and add them to Google's index. So I like to think of this as a library. If I walk into a library and say, show me all your books about trees, the librarian's only going to know that if they're in the database. They're not, going to go out into the streets and look for books. They're going to look at what do we have in our library. So this is Google basically adding your site and all your pages to its library, to its index. So when that person walks into the library, they can provide your website and your content to them. So you need to make sure that you're getting found in the first place. Then when somebody searches, so when you search or a customer searches, Google's algorithm sort of looks through all that information in the index, obviously very, very quickly, and finds the information that the person's looking for. And that could be website pages, it could be images, sometimes ads as well, sometimes Google Maps will pop up there too. All these different elements to make the best possible search engine results page for that search, for that user, based on things like their location as well. Obviously, if I search in English, I'm going to see my results in English too. The algorithm uses over 200 signals. So the next question everybody always has is, what are the factors that go into SEO? How can I improve this? What's the recipe for it? There's over 200 signals here to decide which pages and content are most relevant. And it's not the case that someone will be at the top of that search results page all of the time. Every time somebody makes a search, that algorithm kicks in and that search engine results page is sort of recalculated. So bear in mind, there's not sort of a one top spot on search engines. Those signals might look a little different every time that the algorithm sort of calculates the results. And then those results are ranked in order by relevance. And again, if we all do the same search right now, we might see slightly different results based on our previous searches, based on things like our locations, the exact wording that we used, because we might all search for, say, trainers in slightly different ways. So those results are going to be ranked each time by relevance. And then this is something that probably looks quite familiar to you. So in this example, we've looked for a specific business, Stasia's Bakery. So that's our search query, search term, keyword. You might hear all of those terms. They all mean the thing that was typed into the search box, whether that's a word or a longer phrase. In this case, because it's a business, we're getting a Google My Business listing over on the right. So this is available at no charge to set up for your business if you're serving customers in person, whether that's at your location, or maybe you're someone like an electrician who goes out to their location. And in this case, we've also got some ads. We've got some shopping ads, which are the boxes you see at the top there with some lovely cakes, making me very hungry at 11. Time for 11s definitely. Then we've got one ad. You might see more or fewer of those, and you might see some more at the bottom as well. And we've got one organic search results showing up in the screenshot. There'd actually be quite a few more of those underneath, and they tend to take up the bulk of the page. So the organic search result really, as well as the business listing, are what we're talking about when we talk about SEO. The others are paid advertising, which is a slightly different process. Obviously involves payment and signing up for it. So what we're talking about when we talk about SEO is trying to get your organic search results showing up here, helping search engines to understand your website and your pages. You can't pay search engines to appear. It's why they're called organic results, that sort of naturally appearing results. Your results appear without sort of any intervention from you in terms of payment. And it's not influenced by advertising either. So the ads that you see at the top might not be related to the businesses showing up in organic search results. They're sort of calculated separately when this page loads. So some of the things Google's going to use to understand your site, firstly, the speed, the page load time. You can look at g.co/testmysite, or if you search for mobile speed test, or just website speed test, there's actually loads of free tools you can use to check your load time. In terms of the actual content on the page, it's looking to understand the content. So things like accurate page titles can be really helpful. You do want to include keywords and phrases users would type in, but you don't want to try and be too spammy with this. If you ever find yourself trying to trick search engines, it's generally not going to work. They're quite clever in terms of understanding content these days. So you might see some really old school SEO techniques where people say, put the keyword in X number of times exactly and you'll show up. That doesn't really work anymore. You'll naturally, when you're writing, if we're writing a page about dog sitting, we're going to use the phrase dog sitting in there. We might talk about our dog sitters. We might talk about related words like walking and feeding, for example, and all of those will contribute to Google's understanding of the page. So you should still be writing your content for users. They're the ones reading it at the end of the day. So making it useful, making it full of information, clear, very accurate and well written. But you can structure it in a way that search engines will understand by thinking about the page title, by including any relevant subheadings if you have quite a lot of text, just to break it up a bit. And think about links as well. So when you're linking from things like the navigation, use text. Try not to link just from images. You might have some images that have links on them, but generally when you link, you want to have some text because that gives search engines a clue as to the content on the page you're linking to. So if I have text that says book a cat sitter and it links to a page, maybe that page is going to be about how to book a cat sitter. It's giving Google a bit of a clue. So those page titles, but also meta descriptions are really important here as well. Think about making those as descriptive as possible. Think about any meta descriptions on things like your images as well to describe the images. That's also very useful for people using things like screen readers too. So think about the alt text there as well. Again, both for the user and for the search engine. Think about that information architecture. So that also, we've talked about how that's useful for you in terms of planning and for your visitors in terms of navigation, also helpful for search engines. So it's doing a bit of double or triple duty here in terms of how useful that hierarchy is to create. So it can help Google to understand the different sections on your site and what content fits where. And last but not least, we've talked about being responsive. Really important to think about designing your site for all different browsers, device types and sizes, and that might include testing those. So whether that's something very manual, like getting some of your friends to test sites on their different devices, or using one of the tools out there, might even be built into your website system that you have as well, your website platform, where you can view your site as if you're seeing it on mobile. Try those out and make sure that everything's working as expected. Okay, so at the end of our 6 elements that go into making a great website, so let's have a look at some questions. Okay. The Mindful Body, Donatella. Do you recommend one call to action only for a homepage or more than one? I think try and keep it to a handful. And I say that very vaguely because it does depend. So our pet sitting example, they have 2 main audiences. So they want to have a call to action for each of them. You might, if you're an e-commerce site, you might have, some kind of summer collection that's just launched, but you might also want people to come into your store. So you may have two or three maybe different actions, but I would try and keep them very clear as to who they're for and think about how you can nudge people towards the right section for them as well. So a really basic example, if you go on a lot of fashion sites, they'll have on the homepage women's wear, men's wear, children's wear. That's technically 3 call to actions, but it's very clear to me which one I'd be interested in when I go to the site, depending who I'm purchasing for. So you can definitely get away with more than one, but just make sure you're not overloading people with too many choices. Give them sort of the main choices and they can navigate from there. We've got another question from Donatella. What would you recommend to move from having the site available in English only to offer multiple languages? There's 2 sides of this. There's translation side, in which case I would definitely recommend getting an actual translator. Don't rely on any sort of translation tools. You need someone who can actually write and make sure that it makes sense in that language. And in terms of the technical side, that's really going to depend on the platform you have. Some people have it so it's on the same site and there's a drop down to change the language. That's only going to work if it's available on the platform you're using. Others will have a whole separate site, so .es for Spain instead of .co, .co.uk for the UK, .com for maybe everywhere else, .ie. So all these different endings if you do want to have almost separate sites to manage. So there's different ways to do it. I've seen both done well. I think about how many language it's going to be and if it's going to be feasible to manage lots of different sites, or if it makes more sense to pay a bit more maybe for one of those features that allows you to have the drop down and lets customers choose their own. So in terms of our next steps, firstly, thank you all for joining. I hope that's been useful and hopefully we've covered most of your questions. I can't see any more coming in and we're out of time anyway, so hopefully we've got to all of them we can today. In terms of next steps, working through each of those sections, make a list of your goals and think about your audience. Think about your design and template, obviously based on the platform you choose. Think about that structure. That's a really good way to get started, sort of planning the content, and then that leads you nicely into creating useful content for each of those pages in the structure. Think about the features that you might want to use. And then finally, when you're actually writing the content and creating the content and the pages themselves, you can start to think about SEO and hopefully join us for that next session to learn a bit more about that too. And I did say I've mentioned this again at the end, so in case you've forgotten, we do have the Google for Small Business website that you should check out for any further resources, step-by-step guides, digital toolkits. There's a guide for dealing with COVID-19 and all the changes that businesses have had to go through. And you can learn a lot more that really goes hand in hand with some of the stuff we've talked about today and that we will be talking about and did talk about last week in this whole series. So that's in the description box, and I'm sure Sarah's already shared that in the chat at the beginning and now as well. And we would love you to join us for the rest of this series, which you'll find the link to in the description box as well. You can also look at some of the other content we have, as well as this partnership with Leo Fingal. We also have our own regular webinars popping up with other partners, which you'll find on our website, the link that we've got on the screen there. And you can also look at online learning resources too. So not just the live webinars, but we do have online courses available at no charge that you can access whenever you want to. So it's less of a scheduled thing like these webinars and more just something you can dip in and out of. We'd love you to share your experience on social media. So use the hashtag Digital Garage. I'm sure there are people who can make use of this content as well. And if you do have any feedback from today's session, please complete the feedback form that's linked down in the description box. And that will also give you a link to download today's content. You can rewatch the content as well on this YouTube channel. So thanks again for joining us. Thanks for Sarah for being an excellent moderator today, as always. And thank you for Martin and everyone at Leo Fingal for joining us today for this series too. And we hope to see you again later in the series.